Welcome, everybody, to the Inner Carnivore podcast, episode 22, with my special guest, Lindy Louise. Before we get in, whether you guys are streaming this on iTunes, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or watching the full video on YouTube, if you could do a huge favor, like, subscribe, leave a review, rate the episode, rate the show. It helps tremendously. And thank you guys again. That being said, welcome, Lindy. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate taking the time to talk about important stuff today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for people that don't know, Lindy is a doctor of physical therapy. And one of the reasons when I came across your account and we started talking, I wanted to get you on is for two reasons. One, I love having different perspectives of the medical community, because everybody has a different aspect of which they approach not only health and fitness but food. And then the other was when you interviewed Mimi, and I will talk to you about that because Mimi is probably one of my favorite people on the face of the planet. So that being said, we have talked a little bit about your story and how you got here. How did you kind of, I know you're not carnivore, and that's totally fine. Like, I'll explain my views on carnivore a little bit, but how did you kind of get to the place that you are on way of eating, how you recommend, how you coach through patients of yours?
Yeah, that's a great question. And while I don't identify as carnivore, if I can say that, um, my meals are structured around meat. So when people ask me, what do I eat? I say, I eat an animal-based diet, right? And that's kind of a trendy term right now, but I like the term because I do eat some plants that work well for my body, but not all plants because I'm a human and I don't agree with everything. Um, but I started out as a vegetarian a long time ago, so that my journey started there. And it came out of not necessarily like thinking that it was healthier for me, but at the time I was really into learning about the environment. I was 19 and, new to the world, really young. And I met some people who were vegetarians, and I was like, yeah, I think I could do that, and that would be better for the planet. So I went with that way of thinking for many years, and over time I started to learn, well, is this actually better for the planet? I was working on an organic farm on the side during college at the time, and I was, meeting farmers who were doing regenerative agriculture at that time. And I thought it was really interesting and fascinating, and it really challenged my beliefs on, are animals actually really us eating animals really contributing negatively to the environment? So at the same time, I wasn't feeling very well. I was getting migraines at least once a month. I felt like I had low energy. I was motivated, but I was tired a lot, and I just didn't feel right in my body. So I welcomed meat back into my life, and over the next 20 years, that evolved. And here we are today. The past couple of years, I eat a ton of meat in my diet. It's what I structure my meals around. I'm very passionate about cooking at home. And now that I'm in healthcare as a healthcare provider, and I have the luxury of working with my patients inside their home. So it's a very intimate relationship in that I get to see what people are eating, and it kind of opens the door to have a conversation about it. In two ways. One, I'm there, I can see it, right? I can see what they're preparing. Oftentimes I'm there right after a meal or right before a meal. So, it's just small talk. What'd you have for lunch? What'd you have for breakfast? Or at the same time, I am there to help people get strong, right? And getting strong, as you know, JT, is more than just strength training, right? It's how we feel our body. So I feel like I'm really well positioned to now talk with my patients about what they're eating if they're open to it. Not everybody is open to it, and I do like to read the room with my patients because I'm only interested in helping those that want to get helped. Maybe later on, these folks will be open to changing their diet, but I'm not here to convince anyone, but I am here to have a good discussion if patients are open to it.
Yeah, I totally get that, and I think that's super important, because nobody likes the being forced on what your beliefs are, especially from a nutritional standpoint. And to kind of reiterate what you said about your diet, I often, because my name is Carnivore, because I have, a carnivore apparel, because, everything I do is centered around typically the name Carnivore, right? People like to assume my stance on what I think people should eat. And I don't even necessarily think everybody should go carnivore. I don't think it's, I think it's a tool, especially from an elimination standpoint, of really to figure out what makes you feel best. I actually kind of went the opposite way. For about a year, I was animal based, and I would eat fruit and honey because I felt fine. And then I finally decided to flip it and eliminate those, and then I felt better. And so that's kind of why I've molded into the philosophy that I have. But again, that's not my philosophy for most people. Like, I don't even think most people should be low carb. Like, that's not necessarily my stance from a nutrition standpoint. My stance is get rid of processed foods. Get rid of processed foods and see what happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Same.
when most people like have this light bulb go off and go, wait a minute, like it's the food that I'm eating? Like, oh my gosh, of course it is. So, and we talked a little bit about that within the medical profession. We've talked about some of the people I've had on. I've had, a couple of naturopathic doctors, some dietitians, numerous people who have a different role within the medical system. And diet seems to be completely lacking. Nutrition, for a better term. How do you see that play? Because you're with these people, not in a clinical setting. I guess kind of, but you're in home. You're in, an environment, like you said, where you see them eat, you see the foods, you have a chance to have a conversation about that. Where are the majority of people at when it comes to nutrition? Like, are they getting any support from the medical system as far as what they should eat and how it's going to affect them?
Yeah, and I've been fortunate enough to work in many different states. So, when I worked at San Francisco General Hospital, my experience was like a little bit different in the hospital setting because most of the folks were getting their advice from dietitians within the hospital because they have better access to them. Now, when I've had my own clinic in Southern California, or now that I work in patients' homes in another state, the experience is people are getting information from either the dietitians that they just spoke with at like a rehab facility or the hospital, or just like the regular primary care doctor or cardiologist or neurologist or whoever is following their care at the moment. And unfortunately, it's a lot of garbage, right? So the dietitians, and there are really good dietitians and nutritionists out there, so I want to be careful with this, but the hospital-based ones, my patients come home and, they get an Amazon delivery for like a box of Boost or Ensure, right? Their family member has graciously purchased this expensive nutritional supplement for them, and the family thinks that they're serving them well because that is what the hospital doctor, dietitian told them that they should do for eating more protein, right? So, unfortunately, that's what I see a lot of providers recommend. Even nephrologists, the folks that are following, the doctors that are following my patients on dialysis, recently had a patient on dialysis who's really struggling because dialysis is hard. And his nephrologist recommended an Ensure at every meal, 3 times a day. Every meal. Like, I don't even want to add up the grams of sugar and garbage seed oils and just one bottle of that sort of drink. And then also my environment's a little bit different. I work in a community where Abbott is based, and Abbott is the maker of Ensure. So I don't think it's a coincidence that my patients are coming home with these like kind of mandated recommendations to load up on Boost and Ensure, and then the conversation of nutrition pretty much ends there. So it's kind of like a blank slate. I usually start with, what are you eating, right? I gently, advise real food and, say like, maybe don't eat the Ensure the Boost, or like if it makes your kids feel bad, like finish it up if you want to, but there's no need to spend your hard-earned money on that anymore. And that is a little bit of relief for folks. They're like, oh my gosh, I thought like thought this is what I should be doing to take care of myself. So, allowing people to stop buying that and then really kind of asking the question, like, what are you eating during the day? So that's kind of how I start. And we can circle back to that, JT, if you want to like add anything there. But my experience is there's a lot of misinformation from the medical field around what is a proper human diet. And patients are confused because they're hearing different things, whether it's from the news, their doctor, their dietitian. But a lot of it is centered around this ultra processed garbage, which makes no sense to me. I don't know how we got here.
That's my question. So, especially from a registered dietitian, like a registered dietitian is a very tightly held licensure that's like from the government. I believe it's the federal government, is it not? That holds that, and you have to go through very rigorous education, and most, if not all, have some form of beyond undergraduate education. And then you have to go through all of this and you have to maintain your certification, and I'm sure it comes with plenty of continuing education credits. How, and with social media, like I can go up and look, 100 different dietitians and what their views are on nutrition, and it blows my mind. Like, how did we get to this point? I kind of have a couple of philosophies. Is it the fact that from a care perspective, right? So a doctor sees, or dietitian sees a patient in a hospital. They go, okay, I have X amount of time. They're probably not going to follow anything I say anyway. Nobody follows a diet. The stat is like 85% of people fall off a diet. So I'm just going to give them something that they might actually do that may be beneficial versus them not doing it at all. Like, is that where we're at? Or how do we have dietitians online doing videos of mac and cheese, Kraft mac and cheese? Like, how do we get there?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, I didn't go to dietetic school, but I did go to Northwestern University. And, when I was in school, just my own experience, the conversation was, you know, uh, if a patient asks about nutrition, it's within our scope of practice to talk with them about that. But ultimately, you should just refer them to a dietitian, right? So that's what I learned in school. So I thought that that was the right way, right? So maybe these dietitians are, learning this stuff in school, and they truly believe that this is the key to health for humans, right? So I do feel for them a little bit. I think it starts with the curriculum of your program. And until we really take a bird's eye view of curriculum of medical schools, dietetic schools, whatever healthcare provider school, and we really need to revamp it because I think it starts there, right? I think, like, JT, like, think about back to some of the things that your professor said, right? Like, you probably thought that that was just like gospel, right? You go out into the world and you try to implement those recommendations and you find out, well, maybe that isn't the best way. But it really takes someone to put their thinking cap on to really reflect on, is this recommendation that I learned in school actually valid for the patients I'm treating today? And the answer is often no. At least that's been my experience with what I've learned in school versus what actually works in practice.
And yeah, I mean, that's very true for the people that don't know. Like, I started on a similar education path. My degree is in sports medicine. I actually I didn't finish it, but I started on a double degree of my pre-physical therapy uh, prerequisites, because that was my plan, was to go to physical therapy school after. Um, and I ended up just being burnt out with school and end up getting a master's elsewhere. But it's very true. And when I think about, from a sports medicine standpoint, right, like dealing with athletes was literally my degree. Like, I was not only a college athlete, but that was also my degree, was literally being hands-on with athletes. And the amount of nutrition we got was pretty basic. Like, I took a nutrition class, but it was, the basic, like, carb up the night before, if you're going to be doing a lot of, long physical activity, make sure you have carbs prior, limit your, the standard, right? But when I hear what these people are saying, when people who have taken advanced nutrition and dietitian classes, I kind of hear, like, I hear the RDA, right? Hey, this will probably work for the majority of people if they somewhat adhere to it. So that's the information we're going to give you. And it blows my mind that nobody questions that. Like, and I've talked with the low carb dietitian. He's out of the UK, and Mike and we did a show, and he's completely flips the script on everything that his colleagues that he's learned and that his colleagues have proposed, and they have a problem with it. They're like, "Why do you do this? Why do you tell people to go on low carb?" And he's like, they have success on it. Why wouldn't I? And they're like, "Yeah, dude, you can't do that." So it is. I do think it's the curriculum, but it's crazy to me that what you said, they don't then look at it in a real world scenario and go, is this actually what's best for the person that's sitting in front of me?
Correct. Yeah. And I think that, and I think all healthcare providers experience some level of burnout at some point. We are overworked and the profession needs to be bulldozed, or the whole system needs to be bulldozed and it needs to start over. So I don't think people do have a lot of time in their day. And if they haven't experienced this sort of revelation on their own, I do see how you can just keep going with what you learned in school, thinking that was the right thing to do, and believing this narrative that, like, oh, well, the patient's just not following my recommendations. That's why they're not doing well, or it's just genetics, right? That's why they're not doing well, right? This is just, they have diabetes because their mom did, right? Not because they're not following my, recommendations.
Yeah, it's so I'm actually going to do a podcast with a buddy of mine on Instagram about calories specifically, because I've gotten a little bit more into doing some videos on calories, and calories is a fun one, right? Like, people love the calories topic.
Yeah.
And without going into like my stance on calories, what I've kind of discovered is most nutrition, all the way from a personal trainer all the way up to a physician, right? And I've had plenty of experience with both. Most nutrition has so many fail safes as to why the information that you gave is not the reason that they're not successful, right? The personal trainer goes, yeah, I gave them a good plan. They just didn't track their food right. That's on them. Like the nutritionist is, yeah, no, we did it, but they have these hormone issues and they have genetics, so I sent them to somebody else. And then the other doctor goes, yeah, well, so here's a pill for it. And when we talked to you, you said that you think it needs complete overhaul, right? I completely agree. Where does that start? Like, how do we have this massive system with so many layers to it? How does that even start? Like, how does one even begin to try and overhaul this system, which has led us to, like, we're coming up on 80% of the population is overweight?
Right. And I think that there are a lot of answers to this question. So going back to changing the curriculum of these programs is really key, right? A new kind of training for the healthcare providers of tomorrow. And I'm talking like all healthcare providers, because, nurses get more time with patients than physicians. So, like, patients have more opportunity to ask questions to those folks. Same with me. I have the luxury of spending sometimes 45 minutes with a patient. So, we have to talk about something. It might as well be something related to how we can improve your health. So the healthcare team is going to be really key. It can't just be physicians who, are teaching these things, and it can't just be nutritionists. It has to be the whole team, and we have to be on the same page. And I think that it's going to have to be around letting go of these ultra processed foods, right? So there's going to be a lot of pushback from big food, and then ultimately big pharma as well, who are funding these programs often. Medical schools, dietetic schools, you name it. So I think that's one thing. I think a second thing is conversations like this. People can say whatever they want about social media, but it has allowed us access to hear more conversations about this. And if I see, let's go back to Mimi. If I am just a person sitting on my couch watching YouTube, and I see something about Mimi, this, adorable lady who went from 13 meds to 0 meds and, like, got her life back, I'm like, whoa, I'm going to watch that, right? So it's going to take some everyday people sharing their story to the masses, right? So maybe your physician might not know, what's best for your body, but maybe you can look at someone else's success story and say like, hey, I'm not doing well on these 20 medications I'm on. Maybe I'm going to give, what Mimi did a try, right? And see what that does for me. I have nothing to lose, right? So I think it'll take that. It's going to take change in policy as well. So, thank goodness for folks like Callie Means. I imagine you probably follow him on Twitter X as well, who is really going after a change in policy, right? So it's going to come from every level, everyday people actually working with folks in the health, wellness, medical space, policy. It will have to come from every angle because big food and big pharma have a hold on everything right now. And I know that makes me sound like a conspiracy theorist, but if you look around, it's true. So we have to start sharing those stories, and hopefully people put their thinking caps on and they're like, okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like, processed food isn't good for me. Let's go back to the real stuff.
And I completely agree. And when I got into this, I would not have considered myself a conspiracy theorist. Like, I had a healthy distrust of government, right? Like, as I think everybody over the entire course of human history should.
Right.
But the more and more I got into it, the more I went down the same road, and I really started. I go to doctors very, very little. Like if I need like maybe a prescription for some flare-up condition, whatever it is. But I can like
Sure.
predict what's going to happen, right? I can go on WebMD right now. Nobody checks. I could even tell people I'm on medication. They don't really check, right? So I can go on WebMD and say I have X, Y, and Z symptoms, and here's what it looks like, and know what they're going to give me without even 5 minutes of further conversation. They're going to write me a prescription, hand it to me, and away I'm going to go. And like that right there makes me go, oh, like that's a problem. Like, because now we're basically what good am I going to a doctor for other than to get a prescription? Like, I don't get anything out of a visit unless I'm going to maybe an orthopedic surgeon. Even then, I've had some issues with orthopedic surgeons. Like, I'm getting nothing out of that. And so that's the first red flag for me. Like, that's the red flag that we are broken, because there is no, hey, let's find out why this is happening. Like, what's your diet look like? What's your lifestyle look like? What's, any number of these things. And it's just, I just don't know how it's going to happen, right? Like, I do agree that this is one step, right? Like talking about it, getting people interested in it. But man, I think there's a lot to overcome when it comes to trying to overhaul where we're at with the healthcare system.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, the big food companies, they're smart. So maybe they'll find a way, and they're going to have to go where the money is. I mean, even if you look at buying tortilla chips, for example, 4 years ago, you couldn't find anything without seed oils. Now you can go into the store, and if you want to get tortilla chips, you have a few options without seed oils because they have figured out that they can make money off of this. So I'm not suggesting we go eat tortilla chips. That's not what I'm saying. I just think that when there is pressure to change and there's money associated with it, big food will find a way to profit off of that. So I don't know. That would be great if we could somehow profit off of regenerative farms and
Right.
more real food sources. But I think that's pretty far off and probably far fetched.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually had a.
But
But
like I said, no, go ahead. Listening.
no, the regenerative farm thing. Actually was on a podcast with a guy who has a grocery store, and he's very much into trying to overhaul our food system and the way we get our food. And one of the things that I brought up and we talked about was we're up against, so big food has control over everything. And again, that sounds conspiracy, but turn the TV on, right? Look at every single ad that's on Super Bowl Sunday that's paying millions and millions and millions of dollars. Look at all the end caps in a grocery store. If people don't know what an end cap is, that's where the grocery store will put their most profitable items or maybe a sale item or an item that's being pushed by the manufacturers that they're distributing on the end of an aisle, because that's going to garner the most attention and will sell more than something that you have to walk down the aisle for. So just literally look at any of that and you can see it's all big food. Like there's no mom and pop, like grass-fed, regeneratively, organic beef on an end cap of anything in a grocery store. And that's what farms are up against. And the problem with where we're at with farms is most farms are these like generational type thing that are not set up to try and compete online, social media, TV, and they don't have the money for it. And so I very much think, will it ever go big food? No. But what you said about choices that we have, the more and more people that become exposed to it, and the more and more people that start demanding a little bit more from their food, like the no antibiotics push, which is kind of ironic because according to the USDA, no meat's allowed to be sold that has traces of antibiotics. But that's a catchphrase now. So now meat people start to put raised without antibiotics or, that kind of stuff. So I think you're very much correct that it's just going to take a collective continuing push from people to make their preferences known so that then big food will shift and pivot, because at the end of the day, it's all about money. If there's no money to be made, they're not going to do it. If they feel that there's a market and there's money to be made, they'll absolutely try it.
Well, so I guess I think what my role is in this, JT, is that's partially why I started this YouTube channel that I do have and started to make noise on Twitter. Even when I had literally 0 followers on Twitter, I was speaking about these things because I was at a point where I was incredibly burned out, meeting patients who wanted me to help them, but were eating garbage and they didn't even know it, right? Right? They think that they're eating the best thing possible by starting their day with Raisin Bran or Cheerios and Quaker Oats and orange juice and all those things. And I just felt like, well, what difference am I really making here? So I think it's going to take folks like you and I who are making noise about these things, showing that there's a different path. You don't have to take this path, but it could help you achieve your health goals. And then teaching people how to cook. I think that's really been a lost art over the years, and it saddens me how many people don't know how to cook. And some people don't want to learn, and that's okay. I advocate for at least one member in your household that knows how to cook so that you can, uh, reclaim your health. But sometimes people just want to learn the basics. So I know that you try to teach that on your channel, and that's certainly something I try to teach on mine too, that anyone can do this, and it can really actually be pretty simple, and you'll save money. And then also, because I have the opportunity of being in front of patients every day, all day long, when I do meet somebody who is open to the conversation about, hey, what should I eat? The first piece of homework I give them is, tonight I want you to sit down, take out an old-fashioned piece of paper, and I want you to write out all of the animal proteins that you like, right? And people are like, oh, well, what is yours like? And I'm like, it doesn't matter what mine's like, but let's do mine as an example, right? And I always joke, I'm like, mine has ground beef, mine has salmon, it has sardines, but it doesn't have cottage cheese because I don't like that. I'm like, if you want cottage cheese on your list, great. But like, just to illustrate the point that like we're different people, we're going to have different tastes for things, but to keep it sustainable, we got to make your list. That's step 1. Step 2 is we got to fill your fridge with those foods on your list so that you have options, right? And sometimes it's as simple as that. I love when I come back the next time and I have a patient, they're like, here's my list. And they're excited, like, because somebody actually gave them like an actionable step to improve their life. And it's real food. They're like, okay, this lady's not trying to sell me something. She's just trying to help me relearn how to fuel my body. So for me, that's where it starts. I don't know how much I'm helping people, but I'm on a mission to teach people that simple is best. And it starts with, what you're putting in your body. And then, of course, strengthening.
And
what's your role? Like, how do you see yourself in this problem, JT?
So it's kind of changed, right? So when I first started the social media page, my goal was just to have like bring some attention to carnivore and be like, hey, like I'm having some pretty good results. You should try it. And then as I started getting into it, I realized really what I've never realized before in any diet that I've been a part of. Like, so my background, like I said, is sports, collegiate athletics, coaching, training, strength and conditioning. I worked in the fitness industry for a number of years. I did amateur bodybuilding. Like I've done the bro science bodybuilding diets, like counted macros if it fits your macros, calorie, like all of that. And when I have all of the success stories that I've been exposed to, not only training, but also, managing trainers. So I had a large scope. It's almost all centered around weight loss, right? Which is great. Like, don't get me wrong. But it's like, hey, I gained 50 pounds and now I look better and I feel better. Woohoo! We're great. Which is good. Again, do not get me wrong. But when I started getting into carnivore, I realized that there's people who have like completely changed their life, like completely changed the trajectory of their life, and not just from weight loss. Mimi being a great example. For anybody who hasn't listened to Mimi's story,
Exactly.
I will have to post her episode again. You can also check it on Lindy's YouTube channel. She just recently did one with her. Mimi literally went from a near death sentence to like, she's a badass. She's 70 years old, lifting weights, doing like literally anything and everything, and being more active than most 50-year-olds I know. And it was diet. Like it was the
Right.
opposite of
Swimming
all the
in the ocean
medication.
with everything.
Yeah, like she's crazy. And I
Right.
love it. And I have another one on when this episode airs, it'll have been a couple weeks ago, but next week, Valerie Smith, who literally overcame like 40 years of mental illness, like severe mental illness and eating disorders. And like, I almost didn't believe it. Like when I first met her, I'm not in person. When I met her on Twitter, I almost didn't believe it. I really didn't. I was like, there's no way, like, there's got to be something, right? And then I started like following her and interacting with her. And then I had her on the show and I was like, this is literally the most mind blowing thing I've ever experienced from food.
Yeah.
Like that was the difference. It wasn't medication. It wasn't a lifestyle change. It was literally food. And so that was why I started the podcast. I never was going to because time is tough for me. I have two little ones that I'm a stay-at-home dad basically. And so it's tough to like fit in. Like there's a chance you'll hear a little one at some point. And after hearing all these stories, right? After hearing all these stories, I realized that people don't know that food can affect you this way. Food can make you sick and food can heal you, for lack of a better term. And so I've kind of delved into this role that I'm going to be myself. Like I'm going to make fun of people. I'm going to do slapstick videos for entertainment purposes. But I'm also going to try and get people to realize that they don't have to follow along with the narrative that they've been told their entire life. Right. And that's most people's narrative is
Yeah.
you have to eat less, move more. Right. As long as you do that, everything will take care of it. You know what? If you weren't fat, you wouldn't have type 2 diabetes. If you weren't fat, you wouldn't have back pain. If you weren't fat, you wouldn't have knee pain. And then I talk to people that I've known for years. I actually just got a text this morning of a guy who's like, yeah, I'm down 8 pounds, but the biggest thing is my knees don't hurt anymore. He's like, it's the craziest thing. They don't hurt. And I'm like, dude, I can relate to that. I had 2 knee surgeries in college, 2 knee surgeries, an elbow surgery, and a shoulder surgery. A couple years ago, people would be like, so how do you feel? I'm like, I felt like an old man since I was 20 years old. Like, it's literally like everything's always hurt for my entire life. And now all of a sudden I'm like, it doesn't really hurt. Like I'm missing most of my cartilage in both knees, but I feel fine. Like I don't have all of these aches and pains. And so I literally just think it's getting out there. And whether, I have a slightly different approach than most people, as in the fact that I kind of like being controversial with the stuff that I do, to get a ruse out of people, because that's just kind of my personality. But I think it's very much in line with what you're saying. It's even if it's 1 or 2 people, like people will say, hey, yeah, I started following some of your videos, people that I've never interacted with. And yeah, I started eating this way, and it's amazing. Like I'm down 20 pounds. I feel great, and I'm like, that's it. That's literally the
Yeah.
goal, is just to get that word out
I
there.
love that. Yeah, and I think that I love that you're making it more about just than like this isn't just weight loss. This is I was, going down the path of arthritic knees and now I wake up and my knees don't hurt. That stuff is huge. You know how many millions of Americans have knee pain and they think that it'll never get better? Those are like the cool things. Or the Valeries, who, struggled with mental illness for 40 years. Love her. She's a great follow on X. And then, she solved all those problems that she had for decades by just simply changing her diet, right? There's another follow like that. I think her name is Emily Ann. And I find her story fascinating because it's similar to Valerie's, right? Was on antidepressants for years and changed her diet and didn't need them, right? So the power of diet is huge. And I think that we really need to share these little things that people don't expect, right? Like the knee pain, I think is a great example. So, and JT, I've actually heard you talk about that on Twitter or X. Like that's a great thing to talk about. Like, right? Unexpected side effect of this carnivore diet of mine, this, rebellious diet of mine. I don't have knee pain anymore, right? And that's without gel injections, cortisone shots, interventions from orthopedic surgeons. And they're great. They're great when we need them, but if you don't need that right now, more power to you. Just keep on going.
Yeah, and one of the things, so I could do better about this. I love to keep my opinions to most people in a conversation or a debate or argument, whatever you want to call it. I love to keep my actual opinions close to my heart because I enjoy people inferring what they think I believe. And I I don't actually believe that it's carnivore per se. Like it's not this carnivore is not a miracle diet that fixes all these things. What I think the miracle is getting rid of crap. Like you could literally choose whatever diet
Yeah.
you want if you get rid of the crap, the processed foods, the seed oils, which people like latch onto seed oils like, oh, seed oils. Like go watch a video of how seed oil is made. You cannot tell me with a straight face
Right.
that watching seed oils being produced, having a byproduct called bleaching clay, which is then put in a landfill because it's toxic chemicals, you cannot tell me that that's like good. Like we're the only species on Earth. And again, I'll go all the different ways. So like I'll go like I'm religious, but I'll go religious. I'll go the evolutionary route. It doesn't matter. We are the only species on Earth that has no idea what we're supposed to eat, and it's mind-boggling to me.
Right.
Like we'll sit there and go, yeah, that Oreo's
Right.
fine. I
I
can't
love that. Yeah.
I can't pronounce 46 of the 64 ingredients, but it's totally fine. I'm like,
I know the defenders of ultra processed food, particularly seed oils, like I guess I'll just never understand them. We're just cut from different cloths. Because, like you said, the process of making a canola oil is one, just disgusting. And it's incredibly processed. Like, how can you look at that process and be like, yep, that's superior to butter or, tallow or over whatever else you're eating for your fats. So yeah, it's scary and it's fascinating, but we'll just let those people do what they want to do. And I think that eventually they're going to see, folks that have cured themselves of whatever it is, diabetes, knee pain, and they're going to start asking questions if something like that happens to them or if something like that happens to their mom, right? And that's okay. So we just keep sharing stories. If someone wants to join, great. If they don't, that's okay too, right?
so that actually brings up a point I wanted to ask you. So being in the medical, the professional field, when people ask you, right? So the two main ones, even if you're not carnivore, if you promote animal fats, protein, that kind of stuff, the big ones are going to be, well, what about heart disease? What about cholesterol? What about diabetes?
Right.
Right? Like, how do you then come back with somebody to, and I don't want to say,
I bring it. Sorry, you cut out a little bit there, JT. Can you ask the last part?
yeah, how do you respond to someone says it because they're viewing you as a medical professional, and like they legitimately want your opinion, but this is what they've been told.
Right. I just like I gently have a conversation with them about that. Like, we've been misinformed the past couple decades. I truly believe that there is power in just eating real foods, right? If you look around at what's happened with ultra processed foods the past couple decades, it hasn't served us well. And opening it like that, people just get it. However, I still get that fear from them when I'm like, okay, like, what are you eating for breakfast? Raisin bran. What if we had 2 eggs instead? Well, what about the yolk? Like, it's okay, have the yolk. But my doctor said I should only have, just like 7 eggs a week or whatever these people are telling people. So it's hard. It's deeply ingrained in these folks. So I just share what I believe to be fact, that eating real food is okay, right? And they get worried, and they get very worried about red meat every day, every single day. And this is not an exaggeration. When I ask a patient, what are you eating? The first thing that generally comes out of their mouth, I try to avoid red meat for my cholesterol. So, and this is still a very pervasive belief, and this isn't like in a low health literacy community. Um, I am a pauper in the community I work in. Like these people, so it's these people are smart. They're running companies in this country, but they're misinformed because for decades we've been told to fear these foods, and their doctors are still telling them to fear these foods, or the dietitian. So we have a lot to overcome, but I'm pretty assertive and I'm confident when I speak about nutrition to folks. And I like to frame it as like, the ultra processed foods haven't been around for a while. These are new foods. And when they came on the scene, we started having a lot of problems. So let's just go back to the way we were eating, even 100 years ago, what our grandparents were doing. They were eating real food, right? And they were doing much better than we are. And that usually just turns the light switch on in most folks' heads. So whether or not they start to eat eggs after they have that conversation with me, I'm not sure. But at least I heard it from one person that eating real food is okay, even if it is ground beef, steak, or an egg.
No, I think that's absolutely true. And the one perspective that I try and hold, and it's tough because most people who are going to argue with you online are the people that come back with 20 studies, right? They're like, well, this study and this study and this study and this study.
Right.
And then I know you're going to post this study and that has these problems. So that's why that's not relevant. And I've realized that that can get discouraging, right? Because you're like, dude, I'm literally not getting anywhere with this person. But I realized that you're not actually having this debate or this argument with this person for that person's benefit. Like maybe, very small chance. It's everybody else that's exposed to the information. And the one that, and I try and have, when somebody actually wants to have a conversation, I try and do it a very similar way. I'm like, okay, especially carnivore, right? If I can improve diabetes, even eliminate the need for insulin, if I can lower my blood pressure, if I can lower my blood glucose, if I can lose weight, if I can feel better, if I can reduce inflammation, if I can get off thyroid medication, if I can get off, hormonal issues, bowel issues, like all of these inflammatory issues, how can you possibly think that an arbitrary number such as cholesterol, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not telling people to not take a look at cholesterol, but I'm saying you have to look at the totality of what's happening. And you cannot convince me that I can improve every aspect of my life, and yet one number, which I could go on about LDL for quite a while, but one arbitrary number I should reverse all of it. So what you're telling me is I should trade all of those things that I've overcome for a better number on a piece of paper. Like nobody will ever be able to convince me of that. Like that's not something that'll ever happen.
Yeah. And I guess my belief for my own personal health is I would rather chance it, because I look around at my patients who are on 20 plus medications, including statins, and they're doing terrible. They're in and out of the hospital, right? They're starting to get forgetful because they're, likely early stage dementia. And I say, you know what? Like, I'm good. I'm at a healthy weight. My numbers are looking good. If my LDL goes up because of the way I eat and all of my other markers stay the same and I continue to look young and my skin is good and I'm a good healthy weight and I have excellent blood pressure, I'm going to chance it, right? Because the alternative is eating the standard American diet, struggling with weight, having hypertension, putting myself at risk for cardiovascular disease from the other foods I'm eating. And to me, that's just not worth it. Um, I think that's my common sense talking, but we still don't know a lot. And I think that that's why I really like the Sean Bakers of the world who are humble enough to say we don't have all the answers. But to your point of just saying, like, if all of your other metabolic factors are improving except this LDL1 number, let's at least look at that and ask the question why, right? Instead of, just going back to, well, it's science and it's resolved and that's that, right? LDL is, king, ApoB is king. So I think we have a lot to learn. I'm not a researcher, I'm not a physician, so I'm just an observer like you and our listeners. But I do think common sense of ditching ultra processed food and going back to a real food diet is the best start.
And my philosophy is very similar, because inevitably anytime you bring up, well, what did people do 100 years ago? Like when you literally couldn't test for any of
Right,
this, or what did you do when this food didn't exist?
right,
And the comeback is always, well, look at the life expectancy. I'm like, okay, cool. But you know what? We're just really good at keeping people from dying. We're not good at getting people healthy. We're like, just look at the incidence of
yeah,
death of
so
a
true.
first heart attack. Like, it's actually pretty rare for people to die of a first heart attack now. That's not because we're all of a sudden healthier, because we're
Right,
focusing on, cholesterol numbers, which, interesting fact, 75% of people with a heart attack have good cholesterol numbers. It's this fact that we have just been able to prop people up. And now instead of dying at 70 when they normally would have, we're able to keep them going a little bit longer. But it's exactly like you're saying, like they're struggling. They're on medication. My grandfather passed away a few months ago, and it was kind of the same thing. It's like the last 5 years have just been this like slow downhill deterioration of, my wife's grandpa passed within a couple days of each other, but it was the exact same thing. Like I watched these people slowly just deteriorate out, and it was almost the same, like, okay, when's it going to happen? Because at some point, like, this is not quality of life to be living it. And so I
right.
want to live. If you're telling me that I can live super healthy all the way up to 70, or I can be like marginal from 50 to 80, I'm not going to tell you I'd rather die 10 years
Right.
sooner, but I'm going to go with like
Yeah,
living and feeling better.
me too. And honestly, like life when you're 70 and beyond and not healthy is expensive. I'll never be able to afford it, right? Like my boyfriend's a wealth manager, so the dinner table is often like, gosh, are we saving enough for retirement? Because I see what an unhealthy um you know last couple of decades can look like. It's expensive. Caregivers are $30 an hour. I'll never be able to do that. And then he's working with people who haven't saved enough. So I think with our powers combined, we're always just like, wow, like we got to stay healthy and we have to save as much as we can. Because like you said, like the quality of life when you're not well is pretty poor, right? And people aren't happy because then they're relying on their kids, and no one wants that. No one wants to burden their kids. None of my patients, that's like, it's what they all fear, right? They don't want to burden their kids because their kids have jobs and kids of their own, right? And it just pays to be healthy. Just pays to be healthy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm not
I
afraid
tell
of
my patients
getting.
all the time, like, if we can.
Good,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
sorry.
No,
No,
continue.
I was just gonna say I tell my patients all the time, can if we can get you healthier and reduce the number of caregiver hours that you need by, really dialing in your diet and getting you stronger, like you're going to have some money left over and you can give it to your kids and your grandkids and you can leave a legacy, right? And they get excited about that. So that's one way I kind of incentivize like healthy living. Like this is going to impact your family in a positive way too.
And back to Mimi. Mimi's a
What were you going
perfect
to say, JT?
example. Um, I lost the train of thought a little bit, but Mimi's a great example. She was living with her daughter. She moved in with her daughter because, she thought she was going to need care for the rest of her life. And now she's independent, and I honestly don't even know. She tells me where she lives, but I see different pictures all the time, and I'm like, I don't know where you are. I think you're just gallivanting around the world now because you're 70, but you act like you're 45, and you're all over the place. And I love it. Like, I love seeing it. And you can't tell me that that's not beneficial for her and her kids, that she was able to get out of that and like regain her independence, right? Isn't that the big medical push, the commercials, like regain your independence? Guess what? Do it with your diet. Like, stop eating crap and you'll regain your independence.
You will, do a couple squats, say goodbye to the Cheerios and the Quaker Oats, add in some eggs, and like we've got some momentum going.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So before I let you go, if you have recommendations, right? Like, I know you get to deal with your patients one-on-one and you get to build a relationship. For people that just stumble across your channel, maybe they're being exposed to you for the first time, what is your like quick hit 60-second elevator speech on just little things that you can do to just improve your life a little bit?
Yeah.
And then if that works, you can get even further into it.
Right. So we all understand what a 401k is, right? So it's a saving for retirement. So a baggy 401k looks like eating proper food, going back to a real food diet, right? Animal proteins you like, fruits to tolerance, vegetables to tolerance if that's your thing, dairy to tolerance if that's your thing, real food. And then strengthen your body. And that can look like different things for different people. It's intimidating if you're just starting out, but you can even go to the gym, a cheap gym, $10, Planet Fitness. Look at what other people are doing. Join a class at the senior center. Or if you're younger, go on YouTube and find a home workout. Start to strengthen your body and fuel it properly. Build up that 401k when you're young. And then you can start to draw on it in your later years when you really, really, really need it. We can get by in these younger years on junk food, but it catches up with us. So if we start when we're young and build and build and build, we're going to have a really big nest egg at the end that we can rely on for as long as we need it, right? So that's my spiel. Strengthen your body, eat right, move, and the rest kind of falls into place, I think.
I think that's a perfect example. And another thing that I try and tell people is, once you get the health down, like once you start resolving these issues, people are sick, right? A study came out, 88% of Americans are metabolically sick. Once you start overcoming that and you actually get to a point of health, you have options. Like, people are restricted. Oh my gosh, it's so restrictive. Am I never going to eat a carb ever again? You'd be surprised what you're able to do when you're healthy and it doesn't negatively affect you. But then you realize what foods actually make you feel better. And no, it's not restrictive, because guess what? I'd rather eat something that makes me feel better than eat something that I know is just giving me a quick dopamine hit. And yet I'm not going to feel good for the next 2 hours.
Totally. It gives us freedom. Eating the foods that are right for our individual body gives us freedom. And sometimes that's time freedom, right? Like, I feel great after I eat. So now I'm going to do something productive or something fun. So I think what you just said is so important. Many people don't understand until they try it out for themselves. So if you're listening and you haven't tried that, try it. Write down how you feel after. If you feel good, keep going with that.
Exactly.
Well, JT, this was such a pleasure and an honor to be on here having this important conversation with you. I hope you continue to expose people to just a different path, an alternative path, because the one that's currently being sold in the medical and health wellness space is not working. So we need other ideas.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you being on. I will link Lindy's social media profiles all over so you guys can give her a follow. Thank you very much for being on here, and thank you for everybody who tuned in. We'll see you guys next time.